All righty, welcome to the discussion session of Tuesday, March 28th. We apologize for the late start. Let's start with the first item, which is review of agenda items and commission questions. Manager McDowell, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tonight's agenda, we have a public hearing on an ordinance authorizing a cable franchise agreement with Verizon. Dan Cohen from Cohen Law Group will be there at the hearing remotely to speak on that. The municipality partnered with Bethel Park, Peterson, St. Clair, to work towards that new agreement. We have the consideration of a resolution for the transfer of a liquor license for Arthur's Corner Pub that's at 4 Bower Hill Road. We heard a little bit about that at the last meeting. We have a consideration of a resolution authorizing the participation of the municipality in settlements of opioid lawsuits. We will have our reappointments and appointments to municipal boards. We will have the consideration of the award of the 2023 Main Road Assessment Sidewalk Maintenance Program. And then also the consideration of bids for our annual street sweeping program.
All right, thank you. Next on the agenda, the 2022 financial report and unassigned fund balance, and Andrew Cruz already set to make his presentation.
That's me. An annual time of year, like a bad rash, I'm back.
Well, no, it's like the holidays, wonderful time of year.
Is it? Is it? All right, well, I appreciate your time this evening. Like we do every March/April timeframe when the financials wrap up, we'd like to present to you what happened. And we'll go through that this year. So 22 to 23, that's where we're going. So what happened? So first, we like to start with the fund balance. That's where we ended the budget cycle. So if you remember one of the last conversations we had was where did we project we were going to be? We said we were going to be around 16%. We ended at 16.1%. So 16.1% of general fund unassigned fund balance as compared to expenditures. So we're right where we need to be, and for reference, for every 1%, that's about $418,000.
And our goal number, I ask this every single meeting. Our goal range,
12 to 15%.
12 to 15, and we're at
That's
16.1, and we
Yep.
said we wanted to be at 16.1, knowing that maybe we want to go to 15 if we want to do.
If you want
15.
to, right?
We have the ability.
Yes,
Okay,
that's
cool.
correct. And that'll be, that'll come in, we'll wrap it both ends. The very last slide is about things that we discussed at the very end of budget time, and if there's anything
Right.
else that's come up so far this
Right.
year. Okay,
Thank you again for including the 1% equals.
yes, that may have been a comment from a commissioner that in prior years to make sure he includes that. I don't know.
It helps $400,000
Yeah.
to bring us down to 15.1%. Hey.
Yep, there we go. So a couple things. So we had three major things happen in revenue in the general fund in 2022. First and foremost, we had a 0.2 mil increase in the 2022 budget. That allowed for capacity for not only 2022, but then in future years. It was a planned increase for things like the comp plan. It helped fund some things within the comp plan, but then when the comp plan falls off, it then has capacity for whether it be wage increases. We've had commodity increases,
Right.
we've had fuel prices, all those different types of things. So it was planned, it came in where we thought it would be. So no big news there, but it was a major revenue change within 2022. The next one would be earned income taxes. This was across the board throughout the tax collection district. So we really have the data. So in Allegheny County, there's four collection districts. There's the city, and there's 3 other regional ones.
Okay.
All we can speak to is what Jordan and what we can, Jordan Tax Service collects for us. They also do the city. It was up across the board in everybody could be, maybe not the numbers we have, but the percentages were all up for everybody.
Meaning in every demographic and area,
That's
every
correct.
income level and every geographic.
Every
area
income level
in
for us was,
Allegheny County.
yes,
Okay.
yes, everything was up. And so, go ahead.
No, go ahead, finish it.
Yeah, so the way we typically look at this year over year is collections prior years. So things we collected in 2022 for 2021 and prior, and then current collections. 25 to 30% is prior years. 75, is 75 to 70% is current year. Both were up about 500 to 600,000. They were both up. What this tells us is that 2023, the 25% that we expect from prior years is most likely going to be eclipsed.
Yes.
As headwinds, as we've seen with the job market, and especially in tech industry and those types of things, we're going to be monitoring that like we do every year. but it's pointing in a positive direction in the headwinds of the economic condition right now. There's nothing pointing, telling us that we're gonna be below budget in any way right now for 2023. So that's a good sign.
So wages have gone up over the past couple of years, and you're saying that wages might be stagnant this year, which is still good, or their wages might continue to go up?
No,
We
you
just-
just said there's no sign that
There-
it's
there's
gonna
no-
go down.
They
No,
might
it's not
continue to
going
go, the collections may continue to rise.
Okay.
Yes.
Because we have the tailwinds of 23 or 22, which we've already seen, we're up 500,000 to 600,000 last year.
Okay,
Above prior year collections, which was, so on and so forth. So there's nothing saying that we're not gonna meet or exceed budget next year. We conservatively budget earned income tax every year. And I just want to remind, we did know this in budget
you
time.
told us.
And you'll see in one of our slides, we, in anticipation of this, we assigned fund balance at that time, knowing this was coming.
Right.
And we were within $10,000.
Very
I
happy
I
about
can't
that.
believe it. It's another one of those. I don't know if I'll ever do this again in my career. I've said that once before, but we were at about $10,000 and you'll see that on a slide here in a second.
Real quick on this, the 98.6, the 1.4, what's that number in terms of revenue? Uncollected.
Uncollected is $130,000 maybe.
Very
This,
small.
that's small.
Wow.
Minute.
Do you expect that to climb, or that pretty much?
That's where we've been with everything.
That'd be record low.
It's like, we have a
Pay their bills.
I'm trying to put it in PC language. We have an awesome tax department that
Right.
has done it for many, many years.
Thank you for
They know
keeping
what
our
they're
G
doing.
ratings
Yes,
up.
I'm trying to keep the G rating. I apologize. It's just trying to, just a lot of good things coming.
Yeah.
And then we did have a conversation about some properties that are very tough in terms of, the ability to develop on them, some spot lots here or there, some landlocked lots. I've even gotten comments from residents who've asked like, hey, you should do more to take those properties back. You were in that conversation. There's just, the value of those properties is so low. It costs more to do that kind of stuff than it is for the value. of the
And you guys will have a report mid-year
Right.
as to example properties, what it would take, those types of things. We'll get that information to the commission. as we go.
Thank
But
you.
all in all, the total of all years delinquents were under $500,000, all years,
Right, going back decades.
decades.
Right.
Real estate delinquent tax is not a problem in Malibu. And I don't intend it to ever become that.
Right,
As
right.
best as I can. I mean, I
Yeah.
understand that
Sure.
I don't control it all. The third area that we always look at is the real estate transfer taxes. There is a headwind here. We know that. It typically takes about 3 months of lag data for it to really start showing up in transfers. We talk about this every year. So we did start to see about 80 properties less than last year transferred residentially. We were about $200,000 less than last year. And it's not much. But we know that's due to inflation impacts, and especially interest rate impacts. So we're watching that. We're watching the transfers. We will be reporting on that. If not earlier, if it becomes a problem, if not earlier, but at least at budget time, you'll get that report as you do every year.
Expected to drop again when we have this conversation.
Yeah, I think we're gonna be closer to 2 million next year.
Okay.
I think that we budgeted at 2.1, so we should be in or around that, and we'll let you know as we move forward through the year. Sales taxes was great. These went up. This was a record increase for us. This is primarily due to an inflation impact to sale prices. Was year over year up 167,000. So
Can I go back to the home, so the average home price sold for 400,000?
yes, correct.
Wow,
That's
that's
correct.
up from 375.
That's correct. Keeps going up
Okay.
every year. So. Good news in recreation, specifically in seasonal programs, the golf course and ice rink. We all saw revenues exceed budget. Revenues in the golf course, good year weather-wise. Seasonal programs, more programs came back, and more people participated. And the ice rink had some specific programs come back that were beneficial to the bottom line, so to speak. So that was all good things, bouncing back.
Skate came back.
Learn to skate came
Learn to
back.
skate
That's
came
correct.
back.
If we want to go specific, yes, learn to skate came back. And Mr. Richmond, the Assistant Recreation Director, is doing a great job with that and getting that taken care of. One thing we like to monitor is our pool deficit. That's something we do report on. It was projected at 75K. We came in around 54K. for that.
So I know in 2022, I know we met and talked about the effects of the pandemic on revenue. We had conversations about if we do X with the pool, we'll lose Y. If we
Yes.
do Z with the pool, we'll lose something else. And it came back better than expected, but it's interesting. We're probably still seeing some of the effects of the pandemic in the budget, I mean, in the programming. And maybe will for another cycle or so. It sounds.
No, I think it's back. The programming's back.
Okay.
Yeah, we're over 3 million now. We're back to where we were before.
Yeah.
I think, yes, there's some lag.
Yeah.
So there are some specific programs that haven't come back due to some state legislation, and there's some other things. So one of them was a major program. So there's some things, but remember too, that a lot of these are seasonal dependent. So golf course could have a really rainy summer and just, you know,
That's it.
your revenue
Yeah.
drops. Pool.
So we had a
same thing. You
mild
see,
year last year.
yeah, or if it's not hot enough during the summer, as much as that might be nice for going out on your porch, it's not good for pool,
Right.
pool revenue. So there are those things, but I think overall, the numbers are back to where they were pre-pandemic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I want a presence for our large studio audience. The pool is usually at a deficit of 50K, right?
Yeah,
That's what we
yeah.
see every
That's where we
year.
want to be. We want to be under
Yeah,
100.
that's our goal,
Yeah.
on 50K, so that's great.
You know, like we were talking about in the last meeting, a decision we're making that could be a case study for like, you know, graduate schools or something, but I think we got lucky with some decisions and I think staff made some smart decisions and we certainly made decisions that, you know, none of us knew how were gonna turn out. We had to make the best decisions with the info we had during the pandemic, going back to 2020, March of 20, this time, 3 years ago. And then moving forward and not knowing how some of the people were coming out, just trying to make the best decisions we could. And, you know, I think we did about as good as we could, did as well as we could, and maybe even better, you know, hindsight, looking at some of these numbers coming in. But it's kind of interesting to see that, I mean, it took 3 years for things to kind of, you know, you don't see that because I feel like we've been back to normal for at least a year, but it takes time. Nobody knew this, you know, when we were making these decisions a couple of years ago.
Andrew, you've got to note your expenditures, the same functions exceeded budget by 73,000.
Mhm.
What was kind of the number one reason why?
Because you have more programs, you gotta pay more people to put them on.
That's the
Yep,
answer.
yeah. Yeah, so we noticed during the pandemic, which I don't say this just because the numbers under there, it's for every $1 up of revenue, it was about 75 cents up in.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
It's a
you
it's a
know.
75.
The fact that your
in
revenues went
expenses,
up
that's
by
correct,
3.2 and your
Yeah,
expense.
and
only
it's
went up
holding.
2.1.
Every time we
Yeah.
see it going up, that's really what
Yeah,
it comes
that's
down
well
to.
managed.
Yeah, I will comment two things. One, we're not presenting it here, is the parking fund, same thing.
Okay.
We're saying that it's in the third year, it's finally stabilizing.
Oh, people are
We're
working.
back, yeah, so the parking, outside of, I guess, the Vibrant Uptown project. We would be well above, back to where we were revenue wise, but we're at least seeing the transient parking back.
North garage,
In the north garage, south
south
garage,
garage.
things are filling up, so we're back, so it took 3 years. Did take 3 years to do that.
Leases, because I know there's concern on. Because more folks working from home. Wouldn't be as many leases.
They're lower than they were pre-pandemic, there's no doubt about that, but transient parking is up.
Up,
And it
and
is
that
more
money.
than enough making up for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
That difference,
That's
yes,
much
we're
better.
well over, back over 2 million again in that fund. And we're where we need to be there. Other noted revenues, the ARPA funds or American Rescue Plan Act. So 2.8 million was recognized in government services in 2022, so that you'll see that big number now come into future slide. Investment earnings, as interest rates started ticking up, our investment plan kicks into place where we have banking relationships and those things. And in the general fund, there was an additional 116K that we weren't anticipating as well. A little bit more sour note is cable franchise fees continue to slide. The fees are about 17K under last year, totaling 667,000. So
That's
they were
gonna go
close to
away.
900,000 when it started, so.
That's just gonna disappear, right?
So.
Well, Dan Cohen did send us a note about New York State proposing a different structure of how they charge. And I thought it was really interesting. And he actually found the act and sent it to us. I don't know if you were CC'd on that, I think, Phil. So, you know, that might be something for us to consider as we move forward to make up some of that lost revenue.
Yeah.
We might be, you know, we might might want to have him in to talk about that as a discussion session, because it might be worth bringing up to, because that would be a major change for us. We would probably have to enact, a change in an ordinance or do something that says we're gonna be doing something different on top of renegotiating a contract too, and there'll probably be fun lawsuits involved, so.
We're still working with Dan's
For-
firm
right, yeah.
for the Comcast contract because we're in that negotiation now.
But it might be good to have him in to talk about that specifically, because it seems like he found something in New York that seems to be working and sticking and might be a good way to kind of tackle this.
We have discussion or executive speak with advice, I'm sure quite where that lane.
Oh, either way, yeah.
I, to be honest with you, I think it's either one, because really, I don't know that Dan's so much giving us legal advice as he is just telling you
What's happening.
what's happening in New York and whether or not that's able to be
Applicable.
replicated here is a different discussion, but I think it's all discussion. It's
Either one, we
information.
should talk about it. Just
Some point,
find the
sure.
best venue.
Put it on the list.
Okay.
Craig, I think that's a New York state law,
Mhm.
Okay,
which is important.
yeah, questions about whether we can, sure, okay.
So, moving on to expenditures for the general fund, we had a positive variance within, personnel this year. Not for a good reason necessarily, it wasn't savings and costs, it was, I had a typo in here in what you have
Oh, yeah,
presented
because the
before
math
you.
doesn't.
Yeah, it didn't add up. Well, no, the full-time positions didn't add up, but
Oh,
so the full-time wages, really, we had a variance due to some full-time positions not being filled at the year end. So there was a long lag time there. Plus, we had one new hire start at the very end of the year. So there's really 3 vacancies at the police department all year. Subsequently, in 2023 already, we already have 2 vacancies more. So we're down 4 right now. So those variances that were happening last year in 2021 also happened last year, and we expect them to again to happen this year. So it is something we are watching out for. Animal control had the same thing. They had 2 animal control officers positions were vacant. So there was just some variances with personnel during that time. And then you saw, in order to cover those 24/7 shifts, we did have to have overtime
Sure.
to cover. So that's where we were for 2020.
so which one of those 3 numbers is off? Is the
It was
variance
the 2,
correct?
it was the number, no, it was the number of full-time positions vacant. You should
So
say,
that
yours
should
said
be
3 in
600.
2021.
Oh,
See
yeah,
that? That's what was wrong. It should say 2. We're not filled a year in 2022.
but 500, so 500K minus 360.
There's also fringe benefits, which are not shown there
Oh,
as well. You have part-time wages variances. These are the 2 major variances
okay,
that.
Right,
were-
so they don't add up.
they're not
Yeah,
gonna add,
no.
because it doesn't
Got it.
include,
These are bullet points of.
yeah, general, okay,
General, yeah.
Mhm.
thanks.
It would get real tiny, and I know that Rudy wouldn't be able to read. Yeah, I didn't pick on you, Sean.
Thank you.
Just remember that. So contractual services, every year we have these types of variances. The things to watch out for were the carryovers. We really had quite a few this year, if you remember from the budget
Yeah.
cycle. So that really creates a big variance. There were no real contractual services that stuck out that weren't in the carryover unspent funds. It's really capital this year. Again, with the ARPA funds not being spent, and we'll go over those in a second, there are the real big variances there. So
What's the line there that says, don't tell Rudy?
don't tell them what?
You said he can't read it, so.
Oh, yeah, no.
So is this the time to go through the carryovers, or will we have
No.
a separate meeting on that?
Yeah, we'll talk about that at the end.
Thank you.
These are just the variances for this year. I'll quickly go through these. Ones that we did discuss during budget, they held true throughout the year. Was the specialty equipment had some large repairs this year. Fuel costs went up, as we all did. Pain at the pump also was felt by the municipality. We were at 74K above budget there, which whoops. And then we had some carryovers here with the equipment delays in the operating budget.
Mhm.
We'll also talk about that here in the capital budget as well. So the capital purchases, there were some big ones here. A number of these are ARPA funding that we used ARPA funding for. The rec center roof replacement, the expansion of the women's locker room, and the fire truck, which we still don't have the fire truck. So, it's taking long lead times. It's pretty extensive, some of these lead times in the big trucks. So, these are.
Can they
some
raise the
highlights
price
there.
on it because it comes in years
No.
later?
No, that's locked in, but
Okay.
if you want to order a truck today, it's
Yeah, I know.
Good luck with that.
It's like 5 years.
See when you see it, yeah. All right, so here's the slide I was talking about earlier, so really you can have what's happening in the final budget and the variances, but really what we're looking at is the middle column, which is the actual column. So it looks like a large net change in fund balance of 2.7 million, close to 2.8 million.
Mhm.
When you factor and take out the ARPA funds,
Mhm.
you're at 538,000.
All right,
So if you remember, back to our original discussion about EIT, we assigned $528,000 during the budget cycle, which is about
That's right.
$10,000 left
That's
that
right.
is
Yeah.
left with it. So some of those dollars are already there and gonna be spent in 2023 for various improvements and one-time costs that we had done. So
Mhm.
that's good news. It's something to point out that it's not, we're so flush with 2.7
Right.
million.
Got That's not-
You have to factor those ARPA monies out, those one-time monies out. There. So what are we watching? We talked about the first two. We're still watching the inflation costs on commodities and doing the best we can around it. And making the best decisions that we can. Real estate appeals is a big one. So I know you've heard about it in the news. How it's going to affect us is still yet to be determined. We are watching that, especially the school district. I mean, they have the biggest piece of the pie, so we kind of ride the coattails when it comes to this side of it. So we have one large appeal that was decided at the court level, and they're going to be appealed by the school district for one of our nonprofits. Or they're classifying as a nonprofit now. So that's one, but also the CLR, the common level ratio appeals that may be coming for recent sales. Will that affect us? I don't know. I don't know if it will in the bottom line, but people have the opportunity here with a 2-year window to appeal. If they do it, we'll know pretty soon because the deadline is in 3 days.
Oh,
So deadline's the 31st.
oh,
So we'll have a docket ready to go of all the appeals, and so we'll be able to report that, what's happening there.
Pittsburgh is challenging tax exemption.
Oh, I know. Did you see that? Gainey. Yeah, had a big announcement this morning. UPMC. Had too big. Oh.
So finally, to your point, Commissioner Rainey, so why we have this discussion is to either discuss tonight, which I know that we were a couple minutes late and I'm probably up against my 20 minutes, but is to at least represent those things that were on your commission listing at the end of the budget time. So these were things that didn't make the cut, but were on your watch list per se, so those things were there. These are exclusive of any personnel. We don't really consider those unless absolutely necessary. If we think that needs to rise to that level, but this list is before you. So it can be discussed tonight or put on a future agenda or stay as status quo. We've done that in past, a combination of all of those. So we're here to really answer any more questions you may have about the financials or how we want to move forward with unassigned fund balance moving forward.
I would suggest for commission, I know we had a conversation about Cedar, Holy Cross, Salem. There's some other projects we sent Gateway back for some homework on ideas, what they would cost. So I think I'd be a little hesitant about making decisions on
Right.
allocating dollars until we find out what all those options are. And then make decisions at that time for what to do here.
when we heard back from our comp plan, the initial information is what residents want, parks and rec improvements, walkability, mobility, and then what was the third thing? In the top 3?
Business district.
Oh, yeah, help with business districts. So I'm just kind of keeping that in mind as I prioritize. A lot of these fit under those top 2.
You want to schedule this for a future discussion?
I
We
would
get the
like
additional
to,
information on Cedar Holly Crest.
yeah, I'd like to try and tie into that one. So we get the Cedar Holly Croft. Presentation.
See where the costs come in for Arden as well.
Yeah,
Yes.
so we're
Yeah,
accounting for this
That's going
item.
out for bid.
But we like to make sure that the list is presented these,
Yeah.
if not now, it will be there before you. For a lot of these things are still projects that could be done and need to be done
Like-
at some point,
yeah.
so.
I guess I'll ask the
Um,
manager, is there anything that looks like an emergency to you? Okay, cool. Yeah, let's
we-
talk about it later.
The commission does a very good job as we go through the budget process. Anything that rises to the level if we need to do it now. Typically
It's
gets
taken care
into the
of.
budget.
Yeah, I just didn't know in the 4 months if something happened, ink ice resurfacer broke or something, Cool.
Usually Rudy tells me to put that at the top of the list.
The sexiest one.
Yes. And that's all I have this evening. So, all in all, we're in good financial position. There are some economic headwinds that we are watching. As all municipalities in the entire country is watching. So as we move forward, we'll keep you apprised.
What are we learning on our deposits?
4%, 4%.
Crazy world.
Yeah, I never did. I remember when I left my upper St. Clair position. That was a time of in 2012, and
Yeah.
if I ever see it back at that level, I'd be surprised, and here we are. I can remember my old boss saying that to me, so here we are. So, all right, thank you for your time this evening.
Awesome report, awesome news, great work to your whole department.
Yeah.
And the whole,
No,
the
it
whole
go-
staff.
as I said on Saturday, it's the entire staff, it's not just my department.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Next on the list, the 2023 street maintenance program, Matt Bagley.
Good evening. So after the meeting or after our February 28th commission meeting where we rolled out the recommended bid for the street maintenance and also the street reconstruction program, a couple of things happened that adjusted some of the streets, namely one, we always send out utility letters. We do one calls, we do a complex one call every year just to notify all the utilities of the impending work. That having taken place prior to that meeting on the 28th, Rudy had received a call from the water company indicating that the section of Cedar that we presented to the commission for potential resurfacing the lower half from Public Works, the
Yeah.
lower Public Works entrance to Gilkison was going to be replaced this year. It was just.
They're gonna install those water lines. They'll do the restoration for us,
So they'll end up doing the restoration.
but it
So
won't happen until next year. So,
Oh,
The
okay.
restoration.
right, so if we
Live
can't
with
pave
it.
it this year.
I'm saying take it up again next year.
Exactly.
It's a major street.
No, yeah.
So we,
On the other hand, we'll essentially save the expense because.
Right.
yes,
Exactly.
so that was a change. So we presented that we wanted to do that section, but as it turns out, the water companies.
And take care of it.
That section
Yeah.
next year. So we scrambled a little bit. We've been talking over the last few years that we wanted to get a section of Cedar Boulevard in because it is a high traffic street and it is one that we need to bite off pieces of it as we go. So we looked at the next most relevant section or deteriorated section. And that section ended up being from Cochrane up to Summit. Because they're all, I think there was some other wasn't there other
The water
utility
company
work?
paved From Summit up to Baywood, I believe it is,
Yeah, so
a few years ago.
we were trying to marry in with that work that was done
Yeah.
by the utility company a little bit ago, so that way it would all kind of be a uniform look there. So as a last minute change, we did alter the plan, the specifications. This is all relative to the mill and overlay, so I guess I should have started
So
there.
yeah, so Cedar's
Um,
not gonna be fully reconstructed, that's just mill and overlay.
That's right.
Okay,
Yes, so yeah, Cedar is on the mill and overlay. I had a note here in my recommendation letter. I guess first of all, everyone received a copy of the recommendation letters. In your
Yes.
packet, so we did recommend to adjust the limits of Cedar. That's what we bid out in the program. There was a slight reduction in quantity because obviously that lower half of Cedar is a wider section. It's
Right.
more lanes than the section that we proposed. So that all being said, we put the contract out to bid. The other change that we made was, as a company, we had received some other pricing in from other municipalities on paving. We were seeing that those numbers were coming in a little bit higher than what we initially thought they would be.
Sure.
So in order to make sure that our base bid came in under what our budget was, we adjusted in talking with Public Works. All the streets are there that we presented to the commission at the 28th. Just we moved a couple of them, some of the smaller ones into the alternate bid area, just so that way we had
Cover
the
yourself.
latitude to add or delete. If we got favorable pricing, we could add them in. If it was higher, like we had gotten wind of, then it was one of those things, tagging on to Andrew's presentation, the commodity, like the inflation, we were dealing with that inflation increase on some of the paving items. So that being said, we took bids. You have the numbers there for the base bid and all the alternate bid items 1 through 6. Our total was 658. If you go back to our presentation, in February, the total we had for the base and alternates, we had estimated was gonna be in like the 50-inch range or. Yes, the 640, 650-inch range. Now, the one thing that I will note, and we were right in that 650, but once again, that section of cedar, the quantity was reduced, so it's really not an apples to apples comparison from the letter from the presentation of the February commission until now. But that being said, the mill and overlay program stay within budget. We would recommend that the base bid streets be awarded as presented. And this isn't an item for decision tonight. It's really just a presentation of where our bids came in and really open it up for questions. This was kind of the more straightforward one, so I hit this one first. There's more decisions on the reconstruction one, so I figured if everyone's more or less, or I guess first of all, are there any questions on the mill and overlay?
Yeah,
Bids that we received.
The cedar portion that the water company is now taking care of, what was the PCI of that portion?
Yeah, that would.
Pretty rough.
I don't want to
Pretty rough.
jump into that qualified.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, it's got pretty rough. Something happened over the last, I think it was all the construction.
Yeah, it was the construction.
Oh, it's just a water leaks.
Patched.
It just deteriorated, really.
Really fast. I thought it was the construction vehicles that
There's a
were.
lot of traffic on that street.
Yeah, a lot of
That's
traffic.
why we don't want to let it get to a point where we have to reconstruct that because it would be a nightmare to try to dig that up.
In the February meeting that we showed that lower section was a 63. I don't, if the next question is what is the
section that you're tying in,
it was light rated, but I don't have that.
do we have other, I understand the desire to take another section of cedar and tie it in when that water work is done. Are there other streets in the municipality that would benefit more from having those streets done instead of doing an extra piece of cedar to that tie-in? Meaning,
My opinion on that is we don't want to let Cedar get to a point where we have to dig it up and rebuild it. So we don't want to let those numbers get low enough. We want to be able to resurface that because trying to close that street completely, dig it up, put new drainage in, new curbs, that would be an absolute nightmare. With traffic, where's the traffic going to go if it doesn't go up Cedar Boulevard? I mean, there's no other parallel side streets or workarounds that have to go up Beaton to Washington or Greenhurst up to Bar Hill. It would just turn that into a complete nightmare there.
I mean, is that I guess what I'm asking is if you thought that was gonna happen, why wasn't it on the list the first time around, right? Like,
They're pretty similar in condition, in my opinion, because I drove down the street trying to decide, Matt and I had a conversation. It was either that section or the section by the fields, Dick's, Middlefield and Wildcat. They're pretty similar as well. Now, that's a wider section because it has the parking area along the where the batting cages and
right,
up to Morgan Drive, while the entrance to Middlefield. But they're very similar. So we want to pick off a piece of cedar pretty much every year for the next 4 or 5
Yeah, we don't-
years. We're really looking to do that.
I'm surprised Cedar by Public Works scored as high as it did.
Yeah, I
It
think
shows
it's
you 63, but I'm going.
No,
Those numbers are overrated.
keep in mind too, that we always say that there is a degradation curve that the program uses, and it's based on industry standards, it's based on national averages and things like that of how roads deteriorate. But the true measure of the PCI is really when you go out and inspect, and we've typically done that every 5 to 7 years. It's not a every year type thing but we usually will have a re-inspection done, and there are roads and there's different conditions that, and this isn't necessarily this case with cedar, but sometimes we found that streets that have excessive shade, because they just don't dry out as much, even though the paving was as old as the street next to it, but they might look totally different just because there's so much more shade on a street and the water just stays there and lays, and it's one of those situations. But to your point before. sorry,
yeah,
Jeff.
well, I guess the question I'm asking is, so there are roads, correct, in the municipality that have a much worse PCI score. And we've got roads down in the 50s, maybe lower. So those, I understand what you're saying, we don't want to have to close Cedar. but there are residents that have roads that are already undrivable. So do we want to try to fix some of those? You know, so that's kind of what I'm asking. You know, like if we have a piece of cedar that's gonna be fixed and fixed for us, granted a little bit later. The next question I would ask is, in your opinion, are we in danger of those roads, i.e. cedar, becoming undrivable? Or dropping down to like PCI of 40 or 50 in the next year? If not, I would see wisdom in fixing another road that's maybe already in the 40s or 50s from the PCI standpoint. If not, from your AI, from an actual observation.
My argument to that would be, it's hard to anticipate what the roads will be and what the degradation is gonna be. But you don't have the traffic volumes on side streets, you know, in neighborhoods that you do on that. So you're naturally gonna see more deterioration and you're gonna see a lot more traffic on those streets on a daily basis. So there's more tires rolling over the surface and it's gonna, you know, you're starting to see some of the wearing cores come off down to the binder, but it's not structural yet.
Yeah, so, and we had a discussion, I think, a year or two ago, where we wanted to program in program in an arterial, like this is considered more of an arterial street, like
I
Cedar
see.
Boulevard, or Beverly
I see.
Road. There's a section of Bower Hill Road that we own from Cochrane up to Washington. So those streets, they're so big, we would spend the entire budget if we did just that street in a given year. So we had talked about a few years ago, programming one of those arterials in, because eventually they're all gonna need done again, and we wanna knock off
Do we-
pieces as we go.
Do we do all of Cedar and all of Bower Hill before we do some of the side streets? I guess that's kind of what I'm asking.
I mean, our plan was to pick off sections of it
Yeah,
over the next year.
To do
The
section.
water company,
That's what I mean, like, do we do all of it and be like, hey, you know, your road's terrible, I'm sorry, you're gonna drive down potholes.
We'll
See you in 10 years.
I'll never argue that we shouldn't pave streets. There's that fund balance thing, you know, we can always do that.
Make a pitch, right?
Timing.
I would never argue against paving any street. I mean,
Get a haircut, look just like mine.
But I mean, you know,
It
like,
sounds like we should put street paving on that list.
They got other ideas.
yeah, I
That's
just
right.
wonder whether we should,
Anyway, we spend 3 million on street.
maybe we should look at other roads that have worse PCI scores.
Well, there's a bunch of them right here on the reconstruction.
And it's one of every given year, when we put the program together, when we put an individual year's program together, it's a big puzzle. I mean, there's streets all across the municipality. And yes, there's always gonna be a street with a lower PCI than maybe one that we chose. But it is trying to weigh out the streets with the higher traffic, the streets that maybe you're tied into a street that we just paved recently, so we can get some uniformity there. And it is a matter of, like, when we put the program together, we are using that Street Saver program to give us a guide. It gives us, like, I think we usually take 2 or 3 years worth of streets that it recommends. And that's what we look at for an individual year's program.
Okay.
So we don't drive every year, we're not driving all 88 miles of Mount Lebanon to say, well, that one is worse and that one, we're using, we've invested in this program as our,
Way to save time.
yeah, to save time and to efficiently kind of
Figure it out.
program in these
Sure.
streets. And when we looked at Cedar, yes, I thought we had the discussion a few years back that we wanted to start picking off some of these arterials just so that they don't all get to the point of we need to pay all of Bower Hill, all of Cedar and all of Beverly in the same year, because quite honestly, we wouldn't be able to do it. So, and we had planned for a section of Cedar this year. So it kind of made sense, maybe in our mind, just to say, okay, what's that other bad section of Cedar? And if that was,
What would the process be if residents wanted to report, say, something different than what we would see with Street Saver? Is it just the normal, hey, there's a pothole on my street? And then
get
And I
the,
mean, that's one of our inputs too, is we talk to our crews that are doing the patching. Hey, where are you guys working the most? So,
Sure.
you know, you're gonna eliminate that need to patch as well. So we're eliminating some of the hours that we're using to service that street. Where we can work in other areas.
And then does that information go into Street Saver? Like, does that algorithm update to say like, hey, this work has been done, or there are reports of potholes, so therefore PCI goes down by 3?
so what we usually do in that situation is we keep a running, like on a given year, if Rudy's getting calls from residents or things like that, we have for lack of a better term, like a folder that we keep all that information, and those automatically go on the investigate list for the next year's program. So what we do is we say, okay, we've had complaints, we've had concerns on this street. Let's put that on let's look at it compared to the streets that the program prints out. The 2 or 3 years that we're gonna look at anyway, those ones automatically go on the list as ones we want to at least check out to see if they're warranted versus the streets that the programs.
I see every request that comes across the system. So, whether it's put in the system by myself or Dan Kirk or our secretary, I see everyone. I get an email alert. So I have a feel for it, and I get calls too from the residents.
You
Oak Park Place is one that we got quite a few calls.
Are really upset about Oak Park Place, the condition, it is pretty bumpy.
It is. So, but you got to consider too, it's not a main drag.
But it's not a main drag, just
It's
a
just-
circle only for the
exactly,
residents, so it's not gonna be
But
a
it's on the
priority.
list. It's on the list.
But
So
it eventually
North
it'll make
Meadowcross,
it.
another one. That's another street that we want to pick off sections of that.
Yeah.
Because that's the main
a
arterial through the
way.
north section as well. So, I mean, you
It
could
makes sense.
make an argument for another street against any street that we pick at any time. But these are like Matt said, these are the streets that we chose based on, number one, their condition. The other variable too is if there's a lot of cross streets, you start adding in dollars for ADA ramps too. So, that reduces your paving because you're not spending asphalt dollars, now
Right.
you're spending
Spending
concrete
chemical,
dollars, right?
yeah.
To do ADA ramps. So that's another variable that comes into the mix whenever we're making our decision. We have X amount of dollars to work with and we try to make it fit.
Yeah, and we on the ADA ramp side of things too, we are trying to work 2 years ahead, because there is the CDBG funding for handicap ramps. So where we know that there's a street that might be considered in a couple of years, we're trying to get out ahead and using that money
Yeah,
for some of the ramps.
Nice.
that
But we're
the-
paying 50 cents on a dollar for that.
Yeah,
Great.
that's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Thank you, put them in.
But to your point before, Craig, if there are streets that you noticed or that are significantly impaired, those would be ones that if we have a note that in your drive arounds or whatever, that we have a note, and then we would consider we would look at those at least when considering next year's.
I have a question, a rather simple one, because I think I probably know the answer, but I'll check.
So it's a question. question.
It's not a question. There are a number of people on Woodland Drive who are really interested in having a sidewalk put in. They're not, I'd say they're at least a year away from it, guessing, maybe 2. You're just gonna mill and overlay, so that isn't gonna have any effect at all. on
The only other
sidewalk.
thing we will do, that's correct. The only other thing we'll do is we'll replace any sections of curb that are deteriorated with our curb replacement program. So that'll be prior to the mill and overlay. But yeah, there won't be anything outside of the car.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't think there would, but I thought I'd check. Thank you.
Unless they have, I mean, I don't think anyone there has some pumps, right, that are dumping out where the
Not
sidewalk
a
will go.
wetland. That's very-
Actually, I think when Woodland was whenever it was done many years ago, I think we put a collector in
Yeah,
portion of that.
on the uppers.
Yeah, on the upper end. Not on this section.
The only
Right, right,
consideration.
Yeah. I am.
Yeah, so no, there won't be any impact outside of the back. of the curb.
Oh, there's all sorts of issues with putting the sidewalk in. Anyway, because people build into the right of way, so it's gonna be. I can't use that word. Okay, it's going to be difficult. I cheated. I did that.
Any other questions from commission?
On the, we didn't
On the
cover
mill and
those.
overlay, on the mill and overlay. Yeah, so I don't know if am I out of time?
You got about 10 minutes.
So on the mill and overlay program, if the commission
It's supported.
is supportive, then we would present a recommendation to the commission for the April 11th meeting
Okay.
to recommend award to Neely for the base bid streets that we have presented in the letter there.
Just the basement. We can't do any more.
Well, like Rick said, unless you want to use fund guy. All right.
Not yet.
Because we're at 435, 890, and our budget was at 441.
Okay.
So
Yep,
we're
got
about
it.
6 to the good right now. Now,
Okay.
one thing to keep in mind, this did come into play last year, but as it stands right now, I don't know that it will. Because we use liquid fuels funding for this project, we
Yeah.
have to pay the asphalt index. If the asphalt index were to increase, the PennDOT asphalt index were
Yes.
to increase
Yeah.
by more than 10% of what it is in March,
Mhm.
during the course of the paving project, we would have to pay that incremental cost increase to the contractor for what that asphalt index is. So there is,
Yeah.
there is a potential. And I know last year we brought that to the attention to the commission and we
It's hard
decided
to
to
say
move
what's
it.
happening.
2 years, it almost doubled, right?
Yeah, well, last year it went from, it went up to
100 something.
780, 790, something like that in the middle of summer. When we bid it, it was more in like the 500 or 400, 500 range.
Yeah.
And is that expected to continue climbing?
So as it stands right now, in January, I just wrote it down. In January, it was 617. February and March, it was 594. So it's actually gone down in February and March. So April's hasn't been published yet, so I don't.
So it's likely not gonna hit a place where it would be more cost effective for us not to use that money.
It's still built into the contract. We
It's-
gotta pay,
yeah.
we have to pay the increase regardless. Because it's a specification in the contract, for the contractor's good.
If you use liquid fuels funding, they require that you have that provision in your contract.
So you sign the contract, say in April at one price, and if it goes up, you're tied in.
Beyond
That's
ten
what you're
percent,
telling me.
correct.
And
Okay.
on our,
Got it.
even with that much of an increase last year on the index,
Yeah.
it amounted to about a $20,000 increase. So it wasn't that it wasn't that it,
Right, didn't explode.
It's not gonna make a
just-
difference.
it's, but it has a potential to exceed your budget, I guess.
Sure,
is the
got it.
reason.
We have escalation clauses in a lot of
Yeah.
our contracts for salt.
Yeah.
Or I think even actually trash collection has.
It does, yeah.
So again,
Yeah.
based on fuel prices.
What does the liquid fuels money save us? Oh, dollars.
The PennDOT liquid fuel.
Yeah.
275 we allocate towards it, but there's three things we use that primarily for, dedicated every year, streetlights, salt purchases and road repaving. I mean, you could theoretically not have any liquid fuels go towards.
Use it for something
road
else,
repaving, use it for
but it's
something
not gonna offset
That's
that
correct.
change. That's not what I did, right?
It's not worth it.
In last year, we had paid it, but the previous 4 or 5, there was no increase.
Yeah,
So it's not every year there's.
Right.
Sure, it's just last year was exceptional.
is what it is.
What do we want to do with reconstruction?
Reconstruction, well, you've got 7 minutes now.
So in reconstruction, the base bid and alternate bids were exactly bid as recommended to the commission at the meeting last month. We got 2 bids, one from Neanda, one from Independent. It's, as luck would have it, from my estimate in February, I had a 1.4 million base bid and it came in about 1.4. My estimate alternate was 1.3 and it came in at 1.3. It's just dumb luck. I'll go on Andrew and say that'll probably never happen again. So I gotta say it this year. It was that close.
Takes the win.
Yeah, I'll take the win when I have it, but we did get 2 bids, 2 competitive bids there. We are recommending award of all the base bid and then the drainage that goes along with the base bid. And a lot of that drainage is picking up the roof drain collectors to
Sure.
minimize icing
Yeah.
issues and things like that. Now, where it comes in, the additional alternates are where obviously there's
There's not
discussion,
bids,
yeah,
yeah.
so we had bid Arden, Austin, Clemson, Craig, Crystal, Oak, Oregon, Summit, and Wells. All of those were alternate bid streets that we had put out there. At this point, we're recommending start Oak Way has been bid as an alternate for the last 3 or 4 years right down here, and it's if you've driven it anytime, it's in really bad.
Joints are gone.
Okay,
It's been on the alternate list for probably the last 3
It's
years.
time.
It's time. I think that it's time for that one. Wells Drive was one that the patching crews had mentioned from Public Works. Also it's off of Oregon Trail.
Oregon Trail.
Like Oregon Trail comes up and it's like it's just a little
Park
spur
line.
that comes off of. But it's a small street.
Okay.
But it was one that the patching crews
Yeah.
had brought up to Rudy as one that required a lot of
And I've
maintenance.
had fault on that section as well.
So those 2 were concrete streets that we recommended. Then I know obviously that the 2 additional were brick streets. It was
Yes.
Craig
Craig
Court
and
and Crystal Drive. It's the steep section of Crystal Drive. I know we talked about it last month and I know last month we said a decision didn't need to be made at that time, but I guess we're recommending that steep section it is a safety concern coming down there with slippery bricks when it's wet and things like that. But ultimately, we're making the recommendation, but it's ultimately the commission's decision on how you want to proceed. And then Craig Court is just a small detached little, of Anawan, and just a small little detached, kind of isolated cul-de-sac there. Both were brick streets, both were low on that PCI rating, both have been kind of pushed off over the years because while we're working the brick street policy, yes.
One of the residents that lives on Crystal is one of the residents that was involved with the Carnegie Mellon study. Can't remember his name, I'm sorry, but he kind of led the charge with assembling residents that live on brick streets and surveying them, and you know, that he did it on Crystal. You know, we had talked to a lot of residents, and it kind of sparked that conversation before the Carnegie Mellon thing, because you know, the conversation put to the residents was, you know, do you want to save your brick streets? Yes, but at what cost? And there was never an answer to that. And, you know, there was always that, you know, is it $200 more a year? Is it $300? And then people started to peel off. So, you know, but I don't think there've been. There's Chief. I don't know that there's been accidents down on that, coming off that, that brick. I know it is
I lived there
steep.
for
I mean,
years.
Come down.
Crystal comes
Crystal.
down, yeah, Port Broadmoor.
Yeah.
No, Crystal that goes. Castle
Oh, Castle
Shannon
Chapel, sorry,
Boulevard. Yeah,
that's-
not Broadmoor, Castle Shannon Boulevard, the brick,
By the
up
Baptist.
past Bass's Tone.
Yeah, the gypsy lane, right?
Yeah.
We can check into that.
So I mean, you know, it is a steep grade, but it's not like an illegally steep grade, right?
I don't know.
I think it was over the 10%.
I don't think you build that street today.
No.
Right. Yeah, we'd have to find that out. So is the idea to replace it with,
Replace the brick with that.
The lower side, from Gypsy to the bottom. Place.
So, how many, I mean, I know you've got Baptist on one side of that. Were there any residential?
Yeah.
There's about
One or
three,
two,
there's like
yeah.
2 or 3 residents on the right-hand side.
Mhm.
Now, Ben
One of
probably
them's a
knows better.
dentist office.
There's 3 in the dentist side.
So 3 residents would no longer have a brick street in front of their home. That's the impact of the recommendation.
For that.
And the dentist office, right?
And the dentist office would no longer have a brick street.
oh, sorry, what was that?
The
The
dentist
dentist office down at the bottom.
Yeah.
Right off of Castle Shannon
Right.
Boulevard.
Printing
That's
company.
the idea. If someone's sliding, if they can't stop, they go to a rather busy street.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
So-
I lived there for 15 years. I never had a
I'm,
problem.
I'm
I
just
don't-
uncomfortable because we didn't ever finish that brick street conversation
Yeah, I
about
think
which
that we
streets
ought
were
to.
going to not make the cut. I really want to have that conversation. I think it's preventing us from being able to make these kind of decisions. I don't have any, I bet Crystal won't make the cut. But I want to have that conversation and then take the lumps with the residents
What
and
about
then.
Craig Court with it being off I mean, that's kind of there's duplexes up on that.
Mhm.
There's, it's kind of off the beach path as well. Up in a one.
I don't have much of a problem with that. One of the things I like about brick streets very much is the traffic calming, to be very honest.
That's a
and that the
cul-de-sac,
kids can hear
small
them.
cul-de-sac.
That's a cul-de-sac, and actually that Crystal going down as well is. You know, I mean, again, it's not a place you can speed up anyways, because it's steep and it curves. I mean, unless you're insane, you know, you're not gonna go flying up that hill, so neither one of them totally bother me. But I think one of the things we were trying to promise to our residents was that they would have input. And I think that's a part we really have to have.
Yeah, and we need to communicate and be transparent.
Communicate.
Here's
We're
why
really
we're
considering
resurfacing
doing
streets.
this.
Yeah.
If you're interested, let's talk about it and
And-
see.
and if
And
we
I don't
just
know
start-
that you get any
Yeah.
objection to either one of these
And
streets.
if we just start one-offing, you know,
Right,
replacing brick street without having that conversation holistically about what we're doing across the municipality, we're gonna be backpedaling and trying to fix this PR move because we didn't explain what we're doing and why.
So
So
that's
that's,
to reach out to those 3 property owners then on that section of.
I would actually, I'd
do
go
you think
from
it's beyond that?
Broadmoor all the way out just to protect us
Okay,
and
that's a
you
little
as
bit-
well.
That's a little
It-
bit beyond,
It is beyond.
yeah.
But just so that no one is caught by surprise, hey, we're thinking about redoing this street, this section is very steep. we want to replace the brick. What do you think? And let them have input. I think a lot of them probably aren't going to say a thing. We know that. So,
There's sidewalks up there.
No.
no, not on that part, but there is once you get, no, it's not. Bristol,
Sidewalks on the
Right.
other part.
I'm sorry, on one side,
On that
On one side.
on the residential side.
Oh, there
It
is, okay.
it stops, doesn't it, though, like at the
It's
first
between,
house?
it's from the dentist office up to the Gypsy.
Okay.
Okay,
Sidewalk
it's
on
all-
that side,
yeah.
then connect over and you go a little front.
And then there's nothing beyond that.
There's like a cut in the island, but there's no,
Right.
it's not. you know,
Yeah, man, I just think safe rather than sorry. I don't think many of them are gonna care. These aren't in historic district.
But I think to Mindy's
But I would have
point,
said that about Duquesne.
I think to Mindy's point, we've talked about the brick stuff for a long time, and we haven't done anything on it. And we've called for an
Finished it, yeah.
analysis, that's correct, we haven't finished it, we haven't made a decision. We've called for an analysis of the life cycle costs of streets, an analysis of brick and things like that, and we need to make a decision on how we're gonna handle it.
That's right.
Or we need to say, we're not, we're gonna punt it, and then we have to deal with these one at a time.
Every
No.
year.
You know,
That's
So, which
right.
I don't think we wanna do, I think we wanna put a policy in place, understand how to do it, and
Absolutely.
it seems to me we need to do that.
Mhm. Agree.
Well, I mean, just looking at the clock, look at where we are on this topic, trying to give these folks some direction. These are obviously streets that are may or may not get funding at this point, so we do have some time even to make that decision
Well,
about.
they're funded, they're recommended to be funded.
Well, no,
Well, these
below the
top
line.
ones are,
They're-
but then it's,
These,
no.
these are below the
Yeah.
line, meaning that there are options.
But they're highlighted by engineers.
I had recommended, so I guess one thing that could be done is just to provide more time if it's, I don't think that. Try or hijack the conversation, but if we recommended all the base bid, in order to have the contractor
Yes.
begin, if
Yes.
we're recommended the base bid. The
Yeah.
alternate drainage work with the base bid, Oakway and Wells, and then. And that leaves what Crystal was 204,91, so then we would.
You'd have 295.
We'd have 295,000 that then we could change order into the contract. At a later date,
Pick one of the-
another street, like either
Okay.
maybe Crystal again, or maybe a different
Clemson, or
street.
whatever.
Or maybe Oregon Trail, or there's plenty of options there that can make up the 290,000.
Yep.
That those two aren't, that,
Yeah,
that those
perfect.
two were.
So we can
Fine
get
with that.
over.
We can
So we
keep it
could,
moving.
we could get the contractor working on the streets that we have.
Because we have some stuff to do in advance too, to line
Sure.
up the schedules and, you
Do we have an
know,
understanding of what it would cost to replace or repair the brick?
probably 3 to 1. Probably, I
When
mean,
we did that exercise like 2 or 3 years ago with Parkway, and it was like a 2.9 times increase.
Do we, I mean, is that
We didn't
still
bid
the
it.
assumption we're
so
making?
that's an assumption. We
But,
didn't bid it that
in
way.
this
Yeah,
case, we
mine's
didn't bid it that way because we were concerned about right or wrong, we were concerned about the steepness of it was steeper.
Right.
That section, so we wouldn't necessarily recommend that for brick reconstruction, from my perspective.
That makes sense. So that'll buy us some time. Keep moving, go ahead, award the contract, pull out the brick streets, and then we'll revisit it
And then let's figure out
whenever.
how to do. a public
And
thing.
then we'll have an ad at some point, some street will add in.
Yes.
Yeah.
To get to
something.
our budget number.
To get to the budget
Yes.
number, because this would be
Yeah.
below that budget number.
Right,
So that works, so I'll revise that recommendation.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Good stuff, all right, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, next on the list, electric battery safety and codes.
Yeah.
Right.
I may,
There we go.
here for you. We'll see how we're doing with time and we got
Hope you're doing fine.
the dog and pony show here for you.
It's an important topic.
It is.
We're naming fires.
Yeah, so I want to just thank you for having us here. Obviously, this is a pretty hot topic in our industry. As we've seen a lot of press about it in New York City and some significant fires that have happened. So today, I just want to kind of touch on a few things, kind of how we got here, where we're going, what we're seeing from an industry standpoint, and then ultimately from a municipal standpoint, what are some things and some actions we can take to help mitigate this challenge. You know, one of the things about lithium ion batteries, we tend to think of that as a new phenomenon, but the reality of it is the work started on this technology back in the late 70s as a response to the oil embargo. In fact, for any of you that go to trivia night at the pub, here's a trivia thing. In 2019, the 3 chemists who worked on that project won the Nobel Prize in chemistry. So
little bit of history, little tidbit there for you. Maybe you'll win a free meal or something. So why are we seeing these challenges today? The reality of it is this technology is still very safe in its own way. That we're seeing just a tremendous penetration in the marketplace. You know, a lot of that's driven by cost. Back in 2000 or back in 1991, 1 kilowatt hour would cost you $7,500 to produce that battery. In 2018, that was $181. Kind of put that in perspective. If you were to build a battery for a Tesla S vehicle back in 1991, it was over $500,000 for just the battery, and that was just the manufacturer of the battery. So it was cost prohibitive. That in today's dollars is under 13,000. So it suddenly has become much more economically feasible. We're seeing a lot more of this. Some of the work that's been done, according to Car and Driver, in the second quarter of 2022, first quarter of 2022, the registrations rose over 60% for electric vehicles. Still a small penetration into the marketplace. It's only at 4.6%. However, that growth of 60% is compare and contrast that with an actual decline of all new vehicle registrations over that same period of time. So they're actually moving in opposite direction, which is not unusual as that technology becomes cheaper and more efficient. So one of the things that, I've always said is this technology comes online, there will be a point in time, potentially in my lifetime, and certainly my kids' lifetime, that we're going to see more electric vehicles on the road than we're going to see internal combustion. Reuters released a study, and these could be all over the place, and take it for what it's worth, because they're looking out to 2050, and a lot of these places have trouble predicting, but that's the predicted breakover point, when we're going to see 50% more, 50% electric vehicles on the road compared to the internal combustion, obviously.
Perfectly on 2050.
Yeah, exactly. It's amazing how that works, isn't it? It's incredible.
Oh, it's guessing.
You want to bet the farm on that? Please.
I'm surprised it's that long. I mean, if there's such a big demand, that's the reason people I know don't buy.
2050 is
Don't
like a
have
jag
announcements.
year for anything related.
Yeah, it's way out there.
2050.
It's way out there. But that being said, Norway, we're at 4.6%, which I said was the highest point for new vehicles. Norway's 86%.
86% electric vehicles.
Of new registrations. So they're seeing a tremendous growth in Europe, which stands to make sense. It's the same reason why you see the most electric vehicles in California versus other parts of the country is because gas prices are so high.
That's right.
It's fuel's driving.
We
it,
can
right?
fix it tomorrow.
Exactly. It's an economic issue. Ironically enough, Pennsylvania ranks 14th of electric vehicle penetration across the United States. So we're in that top quintile. So we are seeing more and more. And I know as we go through the neighborhood. So as I mentioned, it's still a very safe technology, but we're seeing more of it. And when these systems are treated the way they're designed to be treated, they're pretty safe. They're actually quite safe. There are some nuances with them of things that can go wrong. When they catch fire, they go into this condition that's called thermal runaway. And basically what that means is all these batteries are made up of individual little cells. They look a lot like a slightly oversized AA battery. And when one starts to fail, it overheats and it causes the next one to fail, causes the next one, and it's a cascading effect. As those begin to short circuit, if you're anything like I was when my kids were little, they always got a really big kick out of those candles you couldn't blow out, those birthday candles.
Yeah.
You blow them out and then
They come
they
back.
reignite. My kids thought it was hysterical, especially given my profession. I couldn't put a candle on it. But it's kind of the same idea. So what we see is these batteries, they get put out. You think they're out and they come right back on. If you've ever followed the situation that happened in Millvale a few months ago, that's exactly the situation that they're dealing with. They had to put copious amounts of water onto the battery, cool it down. They took it out. As they're carrying it out, they continue to soak the battery until they got it outside to be able to deal with it. So it represents a significant challenge from a firefighting standpoint. It's unique in our industry because typically what we find with gas-fed fires, you turn the gas off, it ends. If it's a standard fire, you put water on it, it goes out. If it's a liquid fire, we put foam on it, it goes out. This one's kind of a different animal for us. So some of the causes that that have been identified for this, and this is where we start getting into some of the prevention stuff. Because of the cost drop that we're seeing, a lot of lower end manufacturers are starting to become
starting to see a value proposition in this marketplace. So we're starting to see some batteries with less and less quality control that you may have. So to replace an existing battery, they may get an aftermarket from, from some other source other than the original manufacturer. There's a reason there's a cost difference, but unfortunately, as we said, economics drives a lot of this. Another issue that we run into quite frequently, and it revolves more around some of the smaller electronics, our phones, our tablets, things like that we find in our homes, are aftermarket chargers. If I go to if I go to the Apple store today, I can buy a charger for my phone. It's going to cost me $30. If I go on Amazon, I can buy one for $5. There's a reason that cost is very, very different. It's not just the Apple premium that you're paying for. There's some safety measures in there that enter into it.
And to tie with that, the codes, being that this technology is growing so fast, the codes and the standards that back up the codes aren't following the drive in technology as fast as the technology is growing. So just for example, in Pennsylvania today, the newest standard for these batteries and for the EVs is basically 2014. So think about how much the technology has grown from 2014 to today.
Well,
So
we might be behind, and after we had this conversation last time, I don't know, Chief Daniels, if I sent you, I think I sent it to you, Keith, but so California's addressed this with changes in the law. There have been other states that have addressed this with changes in the law to deal with battery fires, and, I read some articles. They were selling like blankets that
Yeah, you can
owners
throw over
put
it.
in their
Mhm.
car, and when they
Yeah.
park their car and plug it in, they throw over, which is crazy.
Yeah.
But it is being addressed in other states. They have proposed codes that limit certain things, and I went through a few of them. I don't have every detail in my head right here, but the question I would have, maybe this is more for Phil, is if we decide to make this and, something that we do, if we decide to add more charging stations, that invites more electric vehicles, right? And as people naturally buy more electric vehicles, as it becomes more economically feasible, can we create laws that regulate certain things here in our municipality?
Certainly where you put the chargers.
your building codes are state codes.
So that's pretty much it.
Yeah, the only way to change the state code is what they call the 503 process.
Uh-huh.
So under Act 45, which is the Pennsylvania Construction Code Act, they put a provision in there under section 503 where you can petition and have public hearings to basically implement a code standard or code section that is more stringent than what the state has implemented. And that goes before, after you have the public hearings, that goes before the Department of Labor and Industry. They review it to make sure that it's at least more stringent. If it's it can't be less stringent,
Right.
but you can make it more stringent. And then it goes through, they put public notice on that as well and publish it in the Pennsylvania Bulletin. And then basically you can come back and enact an ordinance. And then it gets posted on their website to show that you've amended your adoption of the statewide code to include this amendment.
Got it.
But again, with the technology, with the technology changing, what you adopt today is going to be out of date in a year or 2 years,
Yeah.
as fast as this technology is growing.
And the other issue we run into, quite honestly, is when we think about where the risk really lies with this, it's more the stuff that's done in homes where we can't really do much with that with the code. So the aftermarket chargers, the e-bikes, the scooters, those are where we're seeing the problems. Yes, cars do catch fire, and that is a significant risk because of the size of the battery you're dealing with. But when we speak volumes, it's a lot of the in-home stuff that we're seeing is really the challenges showing for us.
So like, one of the dangers, and I know we probably can't control very much what people do at home. One of the dangers would be, hey, someone comes into a parking lot and the car catches on fire.
Yeah.
And then that's a danger to the parking lot and potentially other cars or other people that are in it. It sounds like it would be tough to stop them on the way in and be like, hey, do you have a battery from, 2001 or earlier? Okay, you can't park here. I mean, that's not feasible.
Yeah, it represents a challenge. Now, one of the things, and just jumping ahead a little bit,
from a fire safety standpoint, I think when it comes to especially the vehicles, if we can be involved, the fire department can be involved in the discussions about where we place these chargers and what we do with these situations. Because the reality of it is, if we have a car fire, you mentioned the blankets and it sounds kind of funny, but the reality is we have 2 of those. They've been proven to work in a situation where even if you have difficulty putting the fire completely out, it contains it enough that it doesn't spread to other vehicles or doesn't create a bigger problem. So are there opportunities to supply those, much like you find fire extinguishers sitting around, or, you know, I'm kind of talking off the cuff here, but are there other avenues to acknowledge the fact that this technology is coming and there's going to be little we can do from a code standpoint, but are there things we can do to mitigate the hazards? You know, one of the big things that we've gotten involved with, and as Chief Side and I had this conversation just the other day, as far as we're aware, in Allegheny County, only us in the city of Pittsburgh have capabilities to deal with a lithium-ion battery fire. So I just a little show and tell. I won't pass it around because it's kind of funky. It looks like Dippin' Dots. So if you're all familiar with Dippin' Dots, this stuff's called, the technical name for it, or the brand name for it is Cell Block. And in essence, what it is, it's recycled glass is all it is. And the design for it is you just put it in a container. It's smother it with this stuff, it melts around it, encapsulates it, puts the fire, renders it safe, and then it can be sent back to this company for recycling and what they do to render it safe. Works great for the small little phone batteries, things like that. I mentioned the blankets. The blankets are a tool that have been shown to work quite well with regards to really any vehicle fire, but predominantly any sort of larger fire. E-bikes, cars, vehicles, that sort of thing. We have 2 of those that we've purchased. So we're in a position where we can certainly start to make an impact on a situation where we have one of these fires. We have had as a group of fire departments have had conversations with the county, because really we are, as Andrew pointed out, are very fortunate financially. There are many fire departments across the county that don't have the resources we have.
Right.
So for them to spend $600 for a bucket for this and $1,200 for a blanket starts to become really cost prohibitive. So there's been some discussions with Chief Brown at the county about them doing something with their hazmat teams or something to come make this more of a regional type approach, which quite frankly, I feel is probably the most advantageous way to go. Is that when you have a situation, we have enough to get started, but if you need the big resources, you can bring them in.
Is that for the short term? You know, we probably see an increase in electric vehicle usage, right? So is that the answer right now? Is that, hey, we've got these 2 blankets, and if there's a report of a fire, we respond like we normally would right away and deal with what we see when we see it.
Yeah, exactly. So we would deploy the blankets. There's certain techniques that go along with, it's not just put the blanket on, there's certain types of nozzles we use to put copious amounts of water underneath the vehicle where the battery is located to cool it down and to keep it under control and keep it from getting beyond the area. And quite frankly, as I mentioned before, where these things are being stored or charged becomes an issue. Because if this is in a garage, we're going to want to get a tow truck or some way to drag it out of that space and get it out in the open. Because once it's out in the open, our risk to residents and property goes down dramatically. So the idea would be to try to get it out of that space. So as I mentioned before, having us involved in some of those discussions is just some things that we would want to consider.
That's where, I've been thinking about, obviously, you and I talked, we've all talked about this at some point. Yeah, clearly the codes are going to be a challenge to change, but ultimately this is an educational exercise, right? For our public facilities, right, where we put charging stations is going to be a discussion that we can be proactive about and support, right? And make sure that we're putting in locations that are going to promote the safe use. But multifamily residential units that have garages, homes where, and it's, I go back to the battery banks, right? As a backup, to a generator, as opposed to a generator. They're very safe, but, where is a contractor going to propose putting it? Right by the panel. Well, if you're doing that in my house, the panel's at the very back in a very inaccessible place. So how do we, I think I come to the quick conclusion that you guys are doing the right things. The question is how do we provide education when people are considering getting an e-bike, getting a Tesla or other car, what are best practices that we can recommend to people when they're doing it? The Millvale example is an interesting one. Everybody said, oh, they had solar panels and they caught fire. I'm like, no, they weren't solar panels. That wasn't the problem.
Right.
It wasn't, the solar panels aren't catching fire.
And there are provisions in the NFPA already that basically say that if you have a class 3 electric system for that battery charging, like in Millville, that room should be non-combustible. So there are provisions in there.
Right.
But again, with that ever-changing technology, that's gonna be the challenge to stay ahead of it as fast as it's growing.
I think to your point, Andrew, as we continue to market the availability of the charging stations, we also need to make a point of marketing safety. So I think as we, we're talking about a new website, we should probably have dedicated information there. And to the extent that we're getting information out, say at ultra parties and partnership events, maybe it's worth putting together little, buck slips, little cards about battery safety and things like that. And, we don't have to distribute it to every, 14,000 households, but I think there's probably something we could do to take advantage of the marketing of the new stuff. And, oh, by the way, here's how you can be safe.
Well, Earth Day,
Flyers here, so.
Yeah, it's an excellent segue. So what we've started doing from a prevention standpoint is Lieutenant Seeger, who you all know, does our public education program, has started with the third graders. Yeah, he's fantastic. We started in the third grade, or I should say, he started it with the third grade with talking about just general charger safety.
Oh, that's great.
One of the things that kids do, and quite honestly, most adults are guilty of it, where you plug the charger and you throw it on the pillow. Probably the worst thing you could possibly do. You should always have that on a hard surface. So it's reminding kids to do that. We also reinforce that in the 8th grade when we start getting into some of the home ec type safety stuff. Now, the challenge with that group is when you start getting 8th, 9th grade, it's like, oh, that was really cool. I want to try to do that with my dad's battery. So, right. So it's trying to balance that act. So there's that element of it that we're trying to get it early on with the kids, because quite frankly, they're more tech savvy and using that technology more than we ever will. So they're the ones that are good to get to them early. The next piece of it that we've done is you can see here on the screen here on our fire department website, we've added a page for our residents, which is lithium ion battery safety. And we do talk about a number of different topics here, but particularly the ones we're seeing more frequently. So when we start talking about electric bikes and some of the electric vehicle stuff, it's some, one-page pamphlets, easy to read, easy to digest. I believe you received them in your packets.
Yeah.
The idea behind it is just to give somebody a one-pager that's just a quick little reference, because quite honestly, people start paying attention to this when they turn on CNN or ABC News and see the situation that happened in New York. That's when people start paying attention to it. So we want to kind of be on the leading edge of getting that messaging out. And then there's a short video. I won't play it just in the interest of time, but there's a short video on there which just talks generally about some of the safety issues that was put out by the fire safety tech group. So we are trying to get out there. We do a fair amount on social media where we try to push that messaging out. Laura in the PIO office shares it on the municipal side. We tend to have a better penetration into our marketplace. People that follow fire department Facebook pages tend to be other fire departments. So we try to push as much as we can through the municipal side to get it to our residents and get that information out. So as Rodney had mentioned, the biggest challenge that we're running into, quite frankly, is it's such a rapidly evolving situation for us that whether it be the codes keeping up with it, the technology to deal with the fire side, and quite frankly, there's talk that lithium ion may not be around for 10 more years. It'll be replaced by some other technology. So, there's so many things happening in this space right now from a fire safety standpoint that we're quite frankly really working to try to keep up with it. We have a great partnership with Assistant Chief Kakila in the city of Pittsburgh, who's kind of the local expert in this area. One of the reasons why we have the cell block and the blankets and some other things. So as an industry group, we are relying on each other and trying to get the message out and provide that safety message to folks.
I guess if history is any indicator of what's going to happen in the future, we know that our state and federal government, being as proactive as they are on issues like this, the codes will change any day now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I guess until then, we probably should
How
do the
long
best we
was it?
can.
Even had a statewide building code. I mean, that was ridiculous.
Yep,
Took
exactly.
years, like,
And
Years.
that's a big challenge, because just for example, like. Right now, we're under the 18 codes, the 2021
Right,
codes,
yeah.
the next triennial code won't be adopted until 2025.
it's
And,
absurd.
and we've already seen it, and I've discovered it, and I just brought this up to our industry as inspectors, that if you look in the residential code for solar panel, PV panels on roofs. In the code right now, in the 2018 statewide code, it says that those panels have to be listed and labeled in accordance with UL 1703. Which is a standard put forth by UL Laboratories to basically test solar panels. No manufacturer today uses that to test it, because it's already been replaced by another standard.
Yeah.
So it's, how do I confirm
Right.
that what they're wanting to install today meets a standard that has already been outdated?
Right.
So it is a challenge.
Oh, it's been fun, so.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Let us know how we can help.
Thank you.
And unless commission has any other questions,
No, this is awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
all right, we're gonna be adjourned here and we'll see you in the big room in a couple minutes.
So glad you're getting that to the third grade.